or Georgia or Mississippi can vary the degree of liberty, and that you can have more free expression in New York State than you can in Louisiana, because the standard must be uniform, because the First Amendment and the entire Constitution is binding on all the states. Now, an individual state can give more freedom than the national Constitution, but it cannot give less. The national Constitution provides a floor, not a ceiling. So no individual state can give someone less freedom, but they can give more. And since 1947, there has always been a majority on the Supreme Court to say, no branch of government may favor one religion over another, or may favor religion collectively over non-belief, and no one may be punished in any way for either professing or rejecting any tenet of religious faith. But now, for the first time, we stand on the threshold of losing that blanket protection for all rights of conscience, and the President of the United States, who replaces 88-year-old Justice Stevens, will determine if government neutrality, which means separation of church and state, continues in the United States, or whether those who believe that government can support religion collectively will gain their fifth vote and overturn more than 61 years of precedent. And that is what is at stake in this election. Among the four justices who would wipe out the doctrine of neutral government is Justice Antonin Scalia, who says the First Amendment does not protect the devout atheist. But the most extreme is Clarence Thomas, appointed by President Bush Sr. in 1991, who takes the view that the Establishment Clause doesn't even apply to the states, but that therefore each state should be free to have their own official religion and own official church. Justice Thomas is giving a recipe for religious civil war in the United States. Now, before I get into the list of horribles as to what the religious right is doing, let me just state, by way of factual presentation, that both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama have promised church-state separationists on the Supreme Court. And for the past 6 weeks, Senator John McCain has said that if elected, he will put on the Supreme Court justices that will effectively repeal church-state separation and reproductive freedoms, and that the types of justices he would appoint would reflect the will of the people. That is code for saying that the intent of the Bill of Rights would be nullified, because the First Amendment is meant to be a counter-majoritarian document. It doesn't matter how many people despise a form of expression, it cannot be banned. It doesn't matter how many people support a particular religion, it cannot be enacted. As the Supreme Court said in 1943, the protections of the First Amendment depend on the outcome of no vote and the outcome of no election, and no government official, high or low, can say what is orthodox in matters of politics, patriotism, and religion. But all this would be nullified if the Supreme Court listened to the will of the people. Now, before I launch into the list of horribles, let me say that the attacks I'm about to provide on the Republican Party and on current President Bush are not meant as general political assaults on conservatism nor on the Republican Party. They are targeted surgical strikes only on the religious right that manifests in that party and that now manifests through President Bush. In fact, as I say when I speak around the United States, the problem is not the Republican Party per se, it is the religious right that dominates that party. And if in fact the Republican Party were to return to its true roots as a party of limited government, it would not accept within its ranks a movement that tries to achieve totalitarian religious controls over the American people. And so it was that toward the end of his career, one of the icons of modern conservative republicanism, the 1964 Republican nominee for president, Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater, condemned the religious right as being in violation of the limited government tenets of the Republican Party. Right now, though there are definitely problems in other countries, we are the only major Western nation to be caught up in not just a religious struggle, as there are many here in Canada, but to be caught up in a massive fundamentalist religious movement, as embodied by the religious right and evangelical Christian voters who constitute about 1/3 of the presidential electorate. After the 2004 election, a poll showed that of all those who voted for president that year, 21% only were concerned about the economy, but 22%, a whole percentage more of the American voters, were concerned about prohibiting same-sex marriage. When a greater percentage, even if it's just by 1%, of American presidential voters are more concerned about oppressing gays and lesbians than about their own economic well-being, we have the symptoms of a pervasive religious preoccupation in what should easily be one of the, if not the most modern of civilizations. The symptoms of fundamentalism are rather clear: claiming one true faith and a willingness to impose that faith on others, intolerance of dissent, and justification through a claim that the scripture is without error to impose views on all of society. The Republican Party did not become the captive of the religious right until the 1980 election cycle. In fact, in 1976, Ronald Reagan tried to topple incumbent Republican Gerald Ford for the Republican renomination by attacking President Ford from the religious right, but failed. What happened, as best as we can understand, was that Reagan, the consummate actor, won over the religious right operatives in 1979. Supposedly, he and former Texas Governor John Connally, a Democrat who later became a Republican, and John Connally will go down in history as the person who was also struck by the same bullets but survived that killed President Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas. They were both given an opportunity to say what they would say to God at the Judgment Day. And Governor Connally talked about being a good person and how his father was a good Methodist. But Ronald Reagan said he would say nothing to God on the Judgment Day, and looked down at the floor and said he would just throw himself on the mercy of what Christ did for him and everyone else at Calvary. And that is what sealed the deal, and the emerging religious right wing unified behind Ronald Reagan. And so it was during the 1980 election cycle where Ronald Reagan, appearing at a group of fundamentalist ministers in Dallas, Texas, said, "You may not be able to endorse me, but I endorse you." Now, in office, President Reagan did what he could to try to make America a theocracy. In 1987, he tried to put a true totalitarian